On a warm, sunny afternoon in the small frontier settlement where young Thomas lived, the air was thick with the heat of summer. The sun had been beating down relentlessly for days, and the dry ground seemed to crack beneath every step. Thomas, a 6-year-old boy full of curiosity and energy, was outside playing with his wooden toys near the creek that ran just behind his family's cabin. His parents had always told him to stay close to home, but on this day, the excitement of the creek and the adventure of the wild woods nearby had gotten the better of him. The creek, which usually had a gentle flow of cool water, had started to shrink as the summer heat drained the land. The soft murmur of the stream was now more of a quiet whisper, barely trickling over the rocks. It was the kind of summer where the land seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the rains to return. As Thomas played, he looked up at the tall trees around him, their leaves hanging still in the warm air, offering little relief from the heat. It felt like the world was holding on to the heat just a little too tightly. As Thomas sat on a rock by the creek, pretending his wooden soldiers were marching into battle, he noticed something odd out of the corner of his eye. At first, he thought it might just be the wind or a stray animal moving through the bushes, but when he looked more carefully, he saw a figure stumbling through the trees. It was a boy, just a little older than Thomas, but looking very different. The boy was unsteady on his feet as though he was struggling to keep going. He wore simple clothing made from leather and furs, and his face, though tired and dirty, held a look of quiet determination. His eyes, though, were wide and desperate. The boy's clothes were torn in places as if he had been walking for a long time through rough terrain. He had the look of someone who had been out in the wild for far too long. Thomas jumped to his feet and stared at the boy for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had heard stories from his parents about the Native American tribes who lived in the area, but he had never met anyone from them. His parents had always warned him to be careful when it came to strangers, especially those who were unfamiliar. But there was something in the boy's eyes, a clear sign that he needed help. Without thinking much about it, Thomas rushed to the boy. He had grown up in the wild and knew how to survive, or at least how to find water when it was most needed. "Hey, are you okay?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with concern. The boy looking at him didn't answer right away, but instead took another step forward before collapsing onto his knees. His hands shook as he reached out as though he was too weak to stand on his own any longer. Thomas knew immediately what the problem was. The boy was dehydrated, suffering from the heat and exhaustion of the long journey through the wilderness. Without hesitation, Thomas ran back to the cabin. His small legs carried him swiftly across the rocky path as he raced to get the water his new friend so desperately needed. Inside the cabin, his mother was busy preparing dinner, but Thomas didn't stop to explain. He grabbed a bucket from the porch and filled it with cool water from the well in the backyard. His heart raced as he hurried back to the creek, the bucket of water sloshing as he moved. When he reached the boy, who was now sitting against a tree looking even weaker than before, Thomas knelt beside him. The boy's eyes flickered up and a faint smile appeared on his face. With a trembling hand, the boy reached for the bucket, but Thomas held it steady and slowly brought it closer to the boy's lips. As the boy drank, Thomas could see the life slowly returning to his eyes, as though the water was the missing piece that had been keeping him from collapsing. The boy drank deeply, and Thomas could hear the desperate thirst in each gulp. For a long moment, neither boy spoke, both simply focusing on the water that seemed to bring them together in an unspoken bond. When the boy had drunk his fill, he leaned back against the tree, his breathing less labored now. He looked up at Thomas, and for the first time he spoke, his voice hoarse but full of gratitude. "Thank you," the boy said, his words slow but clear. "You saved me." Thomas, a little surprised that the boy could speak his language, simply nodded. He didn't know much about the tribes or their ways, but it didn't matter right now. The boy needed help, and Thomas had helped him. The connection they shared in that moment was something deeper than words, something that didn't need to be explained. The boy slowly stood up, shaking off the rest of his weariness. "I must go," he said quietly. But Thomas, who had a heart full of questions, asked, "Where are you going? Are you going to be okay?" The boy hesitated before answering. "I have to find my people." Thomas nodded, feeling a strange mixture of concern and curiosity. The boy was a stranger to him, yet they had shared something profound. "Good luck," Thomas said, feeling a sense of wonder at the moment they had shared. The boy gave him a small, grateful smile before turning away, disappearing back into the woods as silently as he had come. Thomas stood there for a moment, watching the spot where the boy had vanished. He didn't fully understand why he had helped him or what it all meant, but it didn't matter. It felt like the right thing to do. Little did Thomas know that his simple act of kindness would be remembered by far more people than he could ever imagine, and it would lead to a story much bigger than his small world. The sun began to dip lower in the sky as Thomas slowly made his way back to the cabin. His mind was racing, thinking about the boy he had just met and the world outside the little settlement where he lived. He could still hear the sound of the creek trickling and the memory of the boy's grateful smile. It felt like a small thing, a moment that would soon be forgotten, but in his heart, Thomas knew it was something special, something that could change everything. That night, as the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky, Thomas lay in bed, wide awake, unable to stop thinking about what had happened. It was just water, just a simple thing to do, but somehow it had meant more than that. And the next day, Thomas would come to understand just how much more it really was. The following day, after the sun had risen and the soft morning light filled the cabin, Thomas went about his usual routine. He helped his mother with small chores around the house and spent some time playing in the yard. But his mind kept drifting back to the boy he had helped the day before, the one who had been so weak and desperate for water. The memory of that moment lingered in Thomas's thoughts like a question he couldn't quite answer. Why had the boy looked at him with such gratitude? What was the meaning of that brief encounter in the woods? As the day passed, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen, something that would connect him to the boy in a way he didn't yet understand. But he never could have guessed what was about to unfold. It was late afternoon when Thomas first heard the sound. It started as a murmur in the distance, growing louder as it drew closer. He was sitting on the porch, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze, when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Many footsteps. It was strange because the only people around their settlement were the families who lived nearby, and none of them would be coming through the woods at this hour. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer, until finally, a shadow appeared at the edge of the clearing. At first, Thomas thought it was just a trick of the light. But then he saw them, figures moving slowly through the trees, coming toward his cabin. His heart skipped a beat as he stood up and squinted into the growing shadows. There were several people, all moving in a steady line, walking with purpose. They were dressed differently than the settlers, dressed in clothes made of animal hides with intricate patterns and beads woven into their garments. Their movements were graceful, yet deliberate, and they carried themselves with a quiet strength that made Thomas feel both curious and a little nervous. The leader of the group, a tall man with dark eyes and long black hair tied back with a leather strap, stepped forward, his gaze locking with Thomas's. The boy recognized him instantly. It was the same man he had seen the day before, the boy's father, the leader of the tribe. His strong presence made Thomas feel small in comparison, but there was no fear in his heart. The look on the man's face was not one of anger or hostility. Instead, it was one of something else, something Thomas couldn't quite understand. It was as if the man had come for something important, something beyond the obvious. When the man reached the door of the cabin, he stopped and nodded, signaling for the others to halt behind him. For a moment there was silence. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant chirping of birds. Thomas's mother, who had been busy inside the cabin, stepped out onto the porch. She froze when she saw the group standing in front of their home, and for a moment she didn't know what to do. Her hand instinctively moved to her chest and she looked at Thomas with wide eyes, unsure of what was happening. The tall man spoke first, his voice deep and calm. "I come in peace," he said, his words clear, though with a slight accent that Thomas didn't quite recognize. He paused for a moment, looking at Thomas with those same dark eyes. "I am the father of the boy who came to your creek, the boy who drank the water." Thomas's mother looked at Thomas in confusion, then back at the man. You are his father?" she asked, still unsure of what to say. The man nodded. "Yes, I have come to thank your son," he said, his tone warm, though still serious. "He saved my boy's life." At that, Thomas's mother relaxed slightly, but the surprise in her eyes didn't fade. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Thomas didn't do anything special. He just gave the boy some water. The man smiled slightly as if he had been expecting this response. To you it may seem like nothing, he said, but in our world such an act of kindness is rare. It is not something we forget. You have shown mercy, and for that I am grateful. Thomas, still unsure of the full meaning of the words, stood silently. He felt a strange sense of pride swelling inside him, even though he wasn't entirely sure why. The boy's father seemed to understand the confusion on his face, for he looked at Thomas with a kind gaze. The kindness your son showed has reached far beyond this place, the man continued, and I have come to show my gratitude in a way that is right for us. I would like to offer a gift. With that, the man motioned to the group behind him. Several of them stepped forward carrying bundles of furs, carefully crafted tools, and large woven baskets filled with what appeared to be food. Thomas's mother stepped forward to accept the gifts, though she seemed overwhelmed by the situation. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice a little shaky. These are too much. The man smiled and shook his head gently. No, it is not too much. We offer these to show our thanks. It is our way, and it is the way of our people. We believe that when kindness is given, it must be returned, and we do so with what we have. As the gifts were placed in front of the cabin, Thomas's eyes widened. The furs were soft and thick. The tools were unlike anything he had ever seen before, and the food, there were fruits and nuts, dried meat, and even some beautiful handmade pottery. His mother, still unsure of what to make of the situation, accepted the gifts graciously, though she could tell that the group's visit was not just about offering thanks. It was something deeper, something more significant. The boy's father turned back to Thomas and his gaze softened. We would like to offer more than just gifts, he said. We would like to invite you and your family to come and visit our camp. We live not far from here, and there is much we can show you, our ways, our customs, and the land that we hold dear. Thomas felt a flutter of excitement in his chest. This was not just a thank you visit. This was an invitation to something larger, something he had never imagined. The boy's father had offered more than gratitude. He had extended an invitation for an exchange of knowledge, a connection between their worlds. We will come, Thomas's mother said finally, after a long pause. Thank you for your kindness. We will visit you soon. The man nodded, his expression still serious but warm. It is our honor, and know that you are always welcome with us. With that, the group turned and began to walk back into the woods, disappearing just as quietly as they had arrived. The sounds of their footsteps soon faded, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Thomas stood there for a moment, looking at the gifts they had left behind. His heart raced with excitement and curiosity. What had just happened? He had no idea, but one thing was certain. His life had just changed. He had made a connection with someone from another world, and he couldn't wait to see where this path would lead. As the sun began to set and the cool evening air began to settle in, Thomas felt a strange sense of anticipation. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew that he was about to embark on an adventure far greater than he had ever imagined. And it all began with a simple act of kindness, a boy giving water to another in need. The next few days were filled with a sense of wonder and anticipation for Thomas and his family. The visit from the tribe had left them with much to think about. The gifts they had received were precious, a reminder of the kindness and respect shared between the two groups. But more than the gifts, it was the invitation to visit the tribe's camp that filled Thomas's heart with excitement. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy he had helped. And now, with the offer to visit the tribe, he would finally learn more about their way of life. Thomas had always been curious about the world beyond the small settlement where he had grown up. His parents, though kind and loving, had often warned him about the dangers of the wild and the mysterious Native American tribes that roamed the forests. They had heard stories of the different tribes and their customs, some of which seemed strange and frightening. But Thomas wasn't afraid. He saw the boy's kindness and he saw the leader of the tribe's gratitude. He knew this was a chance to understand something far bigger than himself. Thomas's parents discussed the invitation in private. His mother was a little unsure about venturing into the wilderness, especially after the surprising visit from the tribe. But his father, who had lived in the wild longer, felt differently. He saw the opportunity as something rare, an opportunity for the family to learn more about the people who had lived on the land long before settlers like them had arrived. It's Important to know more about the land, about those who live here, and the way they see the world, his father said thoughtfully. They have a deep understanding of the wilderness, and we can learn from them. It might even help us survive better in the long run. After much discussion, Thomas's parents agreed that they would visit the tribe. Thomas was overjoyed. He couldn't wait to see the place where the boy and his family lived and perhaps learn about their customs and traditions. His mother prepared a small bundle of supplies for the journey, some food, a blanket, and a few of the gifts they had received from the tribe to show their appreciation. The next morning, the family set out on the path that led into the deep woods toward the tribe's camp. The journey was not an easy one. The path was winding and uneven, and the trees seemed to stretch on forever, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. But Thomas didn't mind. He was too excited to notice the tiredness in his legs or the occasional scrape from the thorny bushes that lined the trail. As they walked deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the forest grew louder. Birds called out to each other from above, and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush could be heard in the distance. It was a world that felt alive and untamed, much different from the quiet, settled life back at their cabin. After several hours of walking, the family began to notice signs of human life. There were faint trails in the underbrush, and the sound of distant voices reached their ears. Finally, they came to a clearing, and there, before them, was the tribe's camp. It was a peaceful sight, with small tents made of animal hides set up in a circle, smoke rising from cooking fires in the center. The air smelled of wood smoke, cooked meat, and fresh herbs. The people moved gracefully about, tending to the fires, gathering around the communal cooking pots and laughing in low voices. Children ran and played nearby, their faces filled with joy. As soon as the tribe saw Thomas and his family approach, they stopped what they were doing and turned to greet them. The leader, the boy's father, stepped forward with a warm smile on his face. He welcomed them with open arms, clearly happy to see them. "You are most welcome," he said. "We are honored that you have come to visit." Thomas's parents exchanged looks of surprise. They had expected a more formal greeting, but the tribe's warmth was immediate. It felt as though they had been accepted as part of something bigger, something more meaningful than just a simple visit. The boy, who had been absent from the camp when they first arrived, appeared a moment later. He smiled when he saw Thomas and ran over to greet him. The two boys embraced briefly, both feeling a strange but deep connection. The leader of the tribe motioned for the family to follow him. As they walked through the camp, he pointed out various parts of the village and explained the tribe's customs. They stopped by the cooking fire, where women were preparing food in large pots. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, and Thomas's stomach rumbled in response. The women smiled at the family, offering them pieces of dried meat and freshly baked bread. They sat together on a low bench made of logs, and for the first time Thomas could feel the difference between his life at the cabin and the life of the people around him. There was no rush, no worry about the work that needed to be done. Everything seemed to flow naturally, like the river that ran near their settlement. The leader spoke again, explaining the tribe's way of life. "We do not live by the clock," he said. "We live by the rhythms of the land, the seasons, and the animals. Every day is a gift, and every moment is an opportunity to learn." Thomas listened closely, fascinated by the man's words. It was so different from the hurried, busy life at his cabin, where time was always running out and there was always something that needed doing. Here there was a calmness, a peacefulness that Thomas couldn't help but admire. The boy's father went on to explain that they hunted and gathered only what was necessary, always giving thanks to the land for what it provided. "We take only what we need and give back what we can," he said. "This way, we are always in balance with the earth." As the evening drew closer, the family was invited to join in the tribe's evening meal. They sat together around the fire, sharing stories and laughter. The tribe's members spoke of their ancestors and the traditions that had been passed down through generations. Thomas was amazed at the way they spoke with such reverence for the past, and he couldn't help but wonder how much more there was to learn from them. The night sky began to change as the stars came out, filling the sky with thousands of twinkling lights. The tribe's people gathered together for a ceremony, and Thomas's family was invited to join. They sat around the fire, listening to the rhythmic beat of drums and the soft chanting of the tribe. The air was thick with the energy of the ceremony. and Thomas felt as though he had stepped into a world that was both ancient and alive, full of wisdom and wonder. As the fire burned low and the night grew darker, Thomas couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection. The visit had opened his eyes to a way of life that was so different from his own, yet so full of meaning. The kindness and respect the tribe had shown him and his family made him realize just how important it was to understand the people around him, to see the world through their eyes. He knew that he would never forget this night or the lessons it had taught him. The tribe had not only welcomed them into their world but had also opened their hearts. And for Thomas, that was the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The days following Thomas and his family's visit to the tribe's camp passed in a blur of excitement and curiosity. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about everything he had seen and learned, the peaceful way of life, the respect the tribe had for the land, and the wisdom of the boy's father all left a lasting impression on him. It felt as though his world had expanded in ways he never expected. For the first time, he began to understand that there was so much more to the world than the small, isolated life he had known in the settlement. After their visit, Thomas's family returned to their cabin, but the connection they had made with the tribe lingered in their hearts. The gifts they had received were carefully stored, but it was the lessons and experiences they had shared that remained with them. Thomas in particular felt a change inside. He had always been a curious boy, but now he had a deeper desire to learn about the world around him and the people who lived in it. In the weeks that followed, Thomas found himself visiting the woods more frequently, hoping to catch a glimpse of the boy and his family. He wasn't sure why he felt so drawn to them. Perhaps it was the boy's kindness or the fascinating way the tribe lived. He began to think of the boy almost like a friend, even though they hadn't spent much time together. But as much as Thomas longed to see him again, the boy never seemed to appear. One afternoon, as Thomas was exploring the woods near the creek, he suddenly spotted a familiar figure through the trees. It was the boy, the one he had helped with water, standing by the creek and looking down at the water as if lost in thought. Thomas's heart leapt with joy. He had been hoping to see him again, and now here he was. Without thinking twice, Thomas hurried over to him. The boy looked up as he approached, his face lighting up with recognition. "Thomas!" he called, his voice filled with warmth. The two boys smiled at each other, both feeling an unspoken connection that had formed between them. They had both been through something unique, an experience that neither of them could forget. The boy greeted Thomas in a way that made him feel like they were old friends, even though they had only met a short time ago. "I was hoping to see you again," Thomas said, his voice full of excitement. "I've been coming to the creek every day just in case you would come by." The boy chuckled softly. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I have something to show you." With that, he turned and began to walk along the creek, motioning for Thomas to follow. Without hesitation, Thomas eagerly followed him, eager to see what the boy wanted to show him. As they walked deeper into the woods, the boy explained that he had something special to share. They moved quietly through the trees, and after a short time they arrived at a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large rock, and beside it a beautiful tree with wide branches that seemed to stretch out like arms, welcoming them. The boy gestured for Thomas to sit next to the rock. "This is where I come to think," the boy said, his voice quiet and thoughtful. "It's my special place. My father told me that the trees here remember everything, that they hold the wisdom of the earth." Thomas sat down beside the boy, looking around at the peaceful scene. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It felt like a sacred place, a spot where the world seemed to slow down and everything became still. As they sat there in silence, the boy began to speak again, but this time his words were more serious. "I want to show you something," he said. "It's a part of our people's way. It's something we do when we need guidance or when we want to remember the lessons of the past." Thomas listened intently, intrigued by the boy's words. He had always been curious, but now he felt like he was being allowed to see something even deeper, something that only the tribe understood. The boy reached into the bag he was carrying and pulled out a small bundle of herbs and twigs. He placed them carefully on the ground, arranging them in a circle around the rock. Then he looked at Thomas and said, "This is a prayer circle. It's how we connect with the spirits of the land and the wisdom of the earth." Thomas watched, fascinated, as the boy began to chant softly in a language Thomas didn't understand. The words were rhythmic and soothing, almost like a song as the boy moved his hands over the herbs and twigs. The air around them seemed to grow stiller, and Thomas could feel the weight of the moment. It was a sacred ritual, and he was being allowed to witness it. For a moment, he felt like part of something ancient and powerful, something far beyond his own understanding. After a few minutes, the boy stopped chanting and looked at Thomas with a gentle smile. "This is how we honor the earth and all the living things around us," he said. "It helps us remember that we are part of something much bigger, that we are connected to everything." Thomas felt a deep sense of awe. He had always been taught to respect the land, but hearing the boy speak about it in such a personal and meaningful way made him realize just how important that respect truly was. It wasn't just about survival. It was about honoring the earth and living in harmony with it. It was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the trees, the boy stood up and offered his hand to Thomas. "Come," he said. "There's more to show you." Thomas took his hand and the two boys walked deeper into the woods. Along the way, the boy pointed out different plants, animals, and trees, explaining how each had its own special meaning and purpose. It was a fascinating world that Thomas had never truly understood before. He had always seen the forest as just a place to play, but now he was beginning to see it as something much more. A living, breathing part of the world that held wisdom and secrets beyond his imagination. When they finally arrived back at the camp, the tribe greeted them with smiles and warmth. The boy's father was waiting for them, his face calm but filled with pride. He welcomed Thomas and his family back into the camp, and they were once again invited to join the evening meal. As they sat together around the fire sharing food and stories, Thomas felt a deep sense of connection to the tribe. He no longer saw them as strangers, but as part of a world that was much bigger than his own, a world that he now felt a part of. As the night wore on, Thomas sat back and looked up at the stars. The sky was vast and endless, and in that moment, he felt as though he were a small part of something much greater. The tribe had opened his eyes to a new way of seeing the world, a way that valued nature, respect, and balance. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever. And from that day forward, Thomas knew that his life would never be the same. He had seen a way of living that was in harmony with the earth, and it had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. But one thing was clear. He would carry the lessons of the tribe with him always, and the bond between their worlds would never be broken. As the weeks passed, the connection between Thomas's family and the tribe deepened. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a boy giving water to another, had blossomed into a lasting bond. Thomas found himself thinking about the tribe constantly, even when he was at home. He would often venture into the woods hoping to catch a glimpse of the boy, or just to walk through the forest and reflect on what he had learned. The tribe had opened his eyes to a whole new world, one that was connected to nature, to the earth, and to the wisdom of generations that had come before him. Thomas's family continued to visit the tribe, each time learning something new. They watched how the tribe hunted and gathered food, always taking only what was needed, always giving thanks to the land. They observed the way the people lived in harmony with the earth, how everything was used with purpose and how nothing was wasted. For Thomas, this way of life felt peaceful and balanced. It was different from the hurried, resource-heavy lifestyle of settlers. But at the same time, it was rooted in respect for nature and a deep understanding of how to live with the land, rather than against it. One day, as Thomas was walking through the settlement, he saw his mother standing with the boy's father, the leader of the tribe. They were talking, their voices low but animated. When Thomas approached, his mother turned and smiled at him. "Come here, Thomas," she said warmly. "The chief has something important to tell you." Thomas approached cautiously, wondering what was going on. The chief looked down at him with a solemn expression, but there was kindness in his eyes. "Thomas," he said in his deep voice, "we have watched you grow over these past few weeks. You have learned much about our ways, and you have shown respect for our traditions. Your family has brought us much joy, and we are grateful for the friendship we have built." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He had always respected the tribe, but hearing the chief's words made him realize just how much he had come to value their friendship. "Thank you," Thomas said, his voice quiet but sincere. The chief smiled, his eyes softening. "You are a good boy, Thomas, but there is one more thing I wish to show you. One final lesson. Come with me." Thomas's heart raced with excitement. What could it be? He followed the chief and his mother as they walked toward the edge of the settlement, toward the woods where he had first met the boy. When they reached the edge of the forest, the chief stopped and turned to face Thomas. "This," he said, pointing to the trees, "is where it all begins. The forest, the land, the animals, all of it is connected. But there is something more, something that you will only understand if you spend time here." Thomas looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. The chief knelt down and gestured for Thomas to do the same. They sat together on the ground, the cool earth beneath them surrounded by the towering trees. "The land speaks to those who listen," the chief said, his voice calm and steady. "But you must be quiet and patient. You must be still and listen with your heart." Thomas nodded, feeling a sense of awe at the chief's words. He had never thought of the land as something that could speak. But the more he thought about it, the more he understood what the chief meant. It wasn't just about the trees and the animals. It was about the life that flowed through everything, through the soil, the leaves, the water. The land had a rhythm, a pulse, and it was a rhythm that could be felt if you were patient enough to listen. For hours, they sat in silence, listening to the rustling of the leaves, the calls of distant birds, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Thomas closed his eyes and tried to quiet his thoughts, focusing only on the sounds around him. After a while, he began to feel a sense of peace settle over him. It was as though the forest was speaking to him, telling him things he didn't yet fully understand, but that he knew would be important. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the chief stood up and smiled at Thomas. "You have listened well," he said. "The land has taught you what you need to know. You have learned how to live in harmony with it, and that is something very special." Thomas stood up as well, feeling both humbled and full of gratitude. He had spent so much time trying to understand the world around him, but in that moment he realized that the key to understanding was not in rushing or forcing things. It was in slowing down, listening, and respecting the world as it was. "Thank you," Thomas said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I will never forget this," the chief nodded. "Remember, Thomas, the world is much bigger than you think. But it is also very simple. If you respect the earth and all that lives on it, you will always be at peace." As the family walked back toward the settlement, Thomas felt a sense of calm he had never experienced before. The teachings of the tribe, especially those of the chief, had opened his eyes to a new way of living, one that was rooted in respect, patience, and harmony with nature. Over the following months, the bond between Thomas's family and the tribe continued to grow stronger. They shared meals, exchanged stories, and helped one another whenever the need arose. The settlers began to understand the importance of working together with the land, while the tribe saw that the settlers were not their enemies, but people who could learn from one another. The friendship between the two groups was more than just a meeting of two worlds. It was the beginning of a deeper connection, one that bridged the gap between different ways of life. Thomas had learned something invaluable from the tribe: how to live in harmony with nature, how to listen to the world around him, and how to treat others with kindness and respect. As he grew older, Thomas carried these lessons with him, sharing them with others in the settlement. The story of how a simple act of kindness, a boy giving water to another, had changed his life was passed down from generation to generation. And though the world around him would continue to change, Thomas always remembered the tribe's teachings, knowing that the true path to peace and understanding came not from force or conflict, but from listening, respecting, and living in balance with the world. The bond between Thomas and the tribe lasted a lifetime, and the wisdom they shared continued to echo through the years. Long after the last fire had burned down and the last song had been sung, the lesson that had begun with a small act of kindness grew into a powerful legacy, one that would last for generations to come.